Hi and welcome to this talk on the unspoken victims. And this talk is going to be about the couple of things. First of all, a little explanation about some of the greatest events in Europe, horrible events in Europe, which happened between 1945 and 1950, or 1951 to be precise. And it's something which hardly anybody has ever heard about. And hardly anybody has taken notice about, and yet it affected 13.5 million people right in the middle of Europe who were expelled from their homeland, and a genocide was committed to somewhere between 2 and 4 million people after the Second World War, between 1945 and 1950. So a very serene session, and let's go right into it. Okay, first of all, let's have a look at Germany. This is Germany before the First World War. You can see it was quite big. You've got all the parts in the east. And after the First World War, some changes were made. Yeah? And quickly, just to sort of get some bearings, we've got the Kingdom of Russia, which is to the right of Germany, going right to the German border. To the south, we've got the Kingdom of Austria, again hitting the German border in the north, and it incorporated Czechoslovakia, and then we've got Hungary as well on next to Austria. So there were a couple of very powerful, very big kingdoms, and a lot of people groups were contained within these kingdoms. So we've got like Russia, where we had Polish, Ukrainians, Belarusians, Russians. The Baltic states as well. So we've got Lithuanians, Estonians, and Latvians, which were all part of the Russian Empire at the time. And then we've got Germany to the west, made up of Prussia, Bavaria, and Saxony, and a lot of other principalities which were joined into one kingdom, into Germany. Okay, so what happened? The First World War took place. Russia had a big revolution, and they were pretty much occupied in sorting their own affairs out. Then we had Germany, and Germany suddenly was split up. Another state was created, which was Poland. Austria was broken up as well, and the Czechoslovakia, or the Czech Republic, joined together with the Slovak Republic, was created. Austria was just a fairly small part, or reduced to a fairly small part, and that was all the result of the First World War. So the people who made all these decisions, they were looking at trying to build a Europe which would be more stable, and where nationalities and borders would be more around ethnic groups, and then certain ethnic groups would have some form of independence, and they could run their own affair. Did it work? So-so. Some of the borders which were drawn weren't really going according to ethnic lines, but were slightly different. I'm gonna just mention a few things. Danzig, you can see up here, became a free city. Danzig had a population of about, that was in the 30s, of about almost 500,000 people in that region. I think the figure is about 440,000. So quite a substantial figure of people, a substantial number of people living in Gdansk or in Danzig, and all of them were Germans as well. So the figure which I mentioned only related to ethnic Germans living in Danzig. Okay, let's have a look at some of the ethnic makeup at the time. This map is from 1931, I think, or 1931, and it describes the ethnic groups and the languages spoken by these groups, which very often sort of aligns according to ethnicity. You've seen before Germany, right, this corridor here, was separated, yeah. So you had East Prussia, and then you had Pommern, and there was this corridor which was given to the Poles, which in a way is understandable. I think it was felt at the time that they needed access to the Baltic Sea for trade and for their survival of the nation, and so Germany was split in half. Yet when you look there, and I want you to look very closely into this corridor, this corridor was pretty much split up between German and Polish people. And let's have one look further. So I'm zooming in a little bit, and you can see this corridor here. Yeah. There are, let me go back again. There are lines along this corridor, which you can see, which connect both sides of Germany, East Prussia as well as Pommern. But the powers to be have decided to give the whole territory to the new Polish state. Also, I want you to look a little bit further here. These bits here, which are quite substantial portions and quite huge bits of land, was inhabited by exclusively Germans. All the cities were predominantly inhabited by ethnic Germans. Yet it was also given to Poland, and as it was proven later, it should become quite a problem. Now you have to bear in mind the Polish people weren't independent before. They were either they were pretty much split between three nations, which was the Russian Empire, the German Empire or Prussian Empire, and the Austrian Empire. So they were under control of either of those, and they naturally didn't like any of those. Now the powers to be in the First World War have decided to give the Polish people their own state, which is good and fine and justifiable. But then the big mistake was they added German territories with ethnic Germans to the Polish Empire. And you can imagine what it's like. Before they were all ruled and controlled by Germans, and now they could control and rule German minorities, which were somehow became part of their empire and their nation. Again, I want you to just, before I go any further, just look at these borders down here and see how they are divided. And when you look back, let me just go back, yeah. You can see that some of it doesn't quite match up. You suddenly find that there were German minorities which were not just up there in the corridor. I've lost my mouse here. Not up here in the corridor, but also further down, which were pushed into the new Polish state. And obviously there was a lot of tension between both people groups as this happened. And partly it wasn't done by the Polish or by the Germans, but it was done by powers which are totally separate from either of those, who decided on the run of the borders or the course of the borders. Okay, the last thing I want you to look at is we've got the new Czech Republic, and right at the border of the Czech Republic we have got the so-called Sudetendeutschen, basically ethnic Germans, German-speaking people who lived near the border. Formerly they were incorporated by the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, and they would consider themselves to be part of this empire. Now they were completely separated from Austria, and they found themselves inside the Czech Republic, and they were a minority. And again, you can see this here. You can see all the German groups. Now, after the First World War, they wouldn't give this territory to Germany as they created the Czech Republic, which would have made sense since they were German-speaking people, but Germany lost the war, Austria lost the war, both had to be punished, so instead of gaining anything, they would take it away from them. And so they would add these border regions, which was inhabited by shouldn't say ethnic Germans, they were Austrians at the time, but by people speaking German. They were added to the Czech Republic, and again later it should create a lot of problems. Again, a lot of decisions which were made just after the First World War with the best intentions to try and stabilize Europe, to have less reason for war, and to create nation states who could look after themselves. Ended up in a lot of tension because minorities were pushed into states they didn't really want to be in, and were oppressed, didn't feel that their identity was taken seriously, and so it caused tension, which one could argue potentially led to the Second World War. Okay, you can see this here. So a lot of stuff has been pushed over. So all this land territory has been given to Poland. Danzig was a free city. Some of the German territories were given to Czechoslovakia. And again, the same happened to Austria as well, where their whole empire was split up into several parts, and Austria was just a tiny, geographically, a fairly small country after the First World War. Okay, again, it's just like a close-up with, this corridor. And you can see very clearly that most of the corridors were really connected with German people, speaking people. And within the countryside, not within the cities, within the countryside, there were a lot of, not a lot, but there were some Polish people living there. I don't know the figures as far as the people are concerned, the demographic figures, since it was mainly Polish people in the countryside and the cities were mainly inhabited by ethnic Germans. I assume that the figure for the ethnic Germans in this corridor was outdoing the demographic number for the Polish people living there by far. So again, big bone of contention. This town here is called Bromberg. It happened to be in the Polish partition after the First World War. And I would encourage you to check it out on Google. There used to be a massacre in Bromberg, which was used for propaganda purposes by the Germans to try and justify their onslaught on Poland. And history is a little bit split up. I read up on it some time ago, and some people think, oh, it was just propaganda. Other people think, yes, there was an issue. There was tension, and the tension ended up in people dying, and so it's worthwhile to check it out on Google, see what it has to say. But I would say this is partly a result of bad politics and of bad, dividing of the country after the First World War to try and create this new state of Poland, which may be totally justifiable. Okay, here we've got another map of the ethnic Polish people. We've got the ethnic Poles here. And you can see as well how this was split up. And after Poland was created, you had a couple of problems, and they become quite obvious. So first of all, you had German minorities all over this part, and there was some tension. There was still some Polish people in the border, and again, you ask yourself, why did they run the border across this way? What was it? Because there was a county borderline, and they just divided it up according to counties. But then, when you go to the eastern part of Poland, what you see is there were a lot of white Russians. I mean, Minsk is certainly a Belarusian town, and that was just on the border. I'm not quite sure whether it was actually added to Poland or to Belarusia. But then you've got down here as well all the Ukrainian population, which became part of Poland. From a Russian point of view, and we can see this here. There is the so-called Kherson line, the Brest-Litovsk line. They wanted to readjust the borders in their favor to obviously protect their own people and to look after their own people, the Ukrainian-speaking people and the Belarusians. And so there was this big tension. Obviously, this tension was played out in the Second World War, where Germany attacked in the east, and Russia attacked in the west, and Poland was split in half, with one half going to Germany and the other half going to back to Russia, to the Russian Empire at the time. So you can see it was a very difficult time and a very difficult period, especially the way populations were split up, and if you favored one side or one part of the population, you would create problems for the other population, and very stressful time to try and resolve the situation and to provide a solution. Okay, anyway, that is the backlash of what was going on. And now let's look at just a little bit historically where Poland has been. One big argument about the Polish Empire has always been that it used to be really big, and that about 1000, around the millennium, about the turn of the millennium till about 1100, there was a massive empire, and big parts of East Germany were part of Poland, but towards the east it stretched quite far as well. It didn't last very long, sort of about 1500. Prussian Empire gained strength, and the borders were extended. I know, and I'm going to talk about this in a little while. My grandfather comes from Meseritz, which is today in Poland, and I once saw his genealogy, which went back all the way to 1500, and his whole genealogy was German all the way through. Out of personal experience, I can say that this area was inhabited by Germans all the way through. It goes back, and the theory is that it goes right back to the change of the millennium. The Germans were settling in that area. Okay. Right, you can see like a close-up as well, the Prussian Empire. So we've got Schlesien here, Mark Brandenburg, and my grandfather would have been in Mark Brandenburg, and we've got Schwiebus here, Meseritz would have just been here at the border. And then we've got Hinterpommern, Vorpommern, and then we've got East Prussia as well and West Prussia. So that was the makeup. Okay, now what I'm talking about today is obviously what happened after the Second World War. Roman Herzog, Bundespräsident 1994 to 1999, made a statement and he said, no injustice, may it ever be so great, can be justified or can justify another injustice. Okay, I repeat, no injustice, may it be ever so great, can justify another injustice. A crime is still a crime even when another crime preceded it. Yeah. The point he's making here is something went wrong, terribly, and we all know this. The Third Reich, whatever happened in Germany, a lot of things went badly wrong, and they cannot be justified. But as a result of it, you cannot commit another crime and justify and say, look, these guys did something really wrong, so we do something really wrong to those guys. Justice works differently. Now we've got a Polish politician who is still around. I think at the moment he's in the opposition. His name is Jarosław Kaczyński. And he says Germany is 100% at fault for the fate of the people who were chased out of the country. Okay, again, Germany is at fault 100% for the fate of the people who were driven out of the country, who were banned from the country. Yeah. So basically what he's saying is Germany's fault that all this territory was lost and that those people were driven out of that territory. And this is a current politician. So this wasn't a statement in the 1950s, but it was a statement which was made sometime in the 90s. Yeah. Big problem. I understand why politicians have to do this. There are a lot of people living in those formerly German territories, and they're obviously afraid. So if he makes a concession and he says, oh, no, this is German land and it really should be returned to them, there's a big problem because these guys will fear for it, and he'll lose votes and probably stay in opposition for the rest of his life. But so they make all these very powerful statements to try and justify themselves. I don't know whether they really mean them or not. Fact is, and let's have a look at these figures here, there were 11 to 14 million Germans who were affected by the expulsion from Prussia and Sudeten Germany. I understand that about 10 to 11 million was in East Prussia, so they are those two legs which we saw, and one in the north going to East Prussia and then Schlesien in the south. There were about 2 million people in the Sudeten Germany in that region, which is basically on the border between the Czech Republic and Germany. The figures I've seen, they range between 11.5 million to 14 million Germans who were expelled from Prussia and Sudeten Germany, from East Germany basically. Vast figure. The statement at the bottom says it's the biggest ethnic cleansing in Europe ever. Yeah. There's nothing been like it after, and there's nothing been like it before. So between 2 to 4 million people were killed through internment camps, forced labor and ill treatment. And we are not talking during the war, but we are talking after the war. That is a period between 1945 and 1951. So about 2 to 4 million people just disappeared. They disappeared. Many of them were killed. Many of them died on the way of malnourishment, or because they had to travel sometimes up to 1,000 kilometers to get away from where they were banned from. There's never been any compensation for those guys who were forced to leave their country from Poland or Russia or from any of the superpowers which were abundant. Even Churchill, it was interesting as well, I was reading up on him. He made some statements in the aftermath of the war that nothing good can come from this, when a quarter of the landmass has been taken away from a country, and about a fifth of its population has been forced to leave this country and having to resettle. Officially, the ethnic cleansing campaign was seized by the Polish government in 1951. So up to 1951, if you happen to be German and you lived outside or on the other side of the Oder-Neiße line, the rivers east of it, then you were in danger of being expelled from Poland. Now the concept seems to be quite clear. By getting rid of all the Germans who were on that territory, the claim for Germany to retrieve this land would become weaker and weaker. After 1951, there were about 1 million ethnic Germans left who stayed in Prussia, and that is less than 10% of the original number of people who were there, and many of them settled in Germany in the 70s and later. So all in all, and this is the reason why I'm mentioning this, there's a great injustice which is being done. In school we learned about losing all this land and all the rest of it. We never learned about the plight these people had, and this is in school in Germany, and what these people had to go through. There's been very little publicity about this, even though it's well documented, it's a fact, these things are known. There's been very little or even no publicity in the media outside Germany, not to speak of Poland, Russia, or anywhere else. Most people haven't got a clue about it. So my grandfather, just to give you an idea why I'm doing this talk, my grandfather comes from East Germany. His name is Gregor Schönborn. His wife was Margarete Schönborn, born Schulz. And for me, I always wanted to see what these towns look like. I mean, they come from two towns. One is called Meseritz, and the other one is called Schwiebus. And I wanted to know what they look like, just to see what they were. But for years I couldn't go there because of the requirement for visas and going through East Germany, and it was very difficult, if not impossible, to go and have a look at those towns. My grandfather wasn't directly affected by this expulsion, but his wider family was. Yeah, and a little bit about him. He was born in the late 1800s, so 1890 something. In the 1920s, he left Meseritz and he went to Germany, to West Germany, to Hagen, to start working there as a teacher. And so he took his wife from Schwiebus, Margarete, with him, and my father was then born in Hagen. Yeah. And so one half of my family is basically from East Germany, from Prussia, and the other half is from Westphalia. And so my upbringing was pretty much shaped by Westphalian culture. Now, what really triggered all this for me to get into this and look into this whole concept of why this culture finished, why the Prussia was annihilated, in the aftermath of the war, were a couple of key events in my life. One of them is one day I kind of realized that all of my friends in Westphalia, so that's in West Germany, had some links to Old Prussia, to the people who come from Old Prussia. Almost everybody had either a grandfather, grandmother, or even all four grandparents who came from this part of Germany. And one day it kind of really hit me, and I hardly know anybody in my circle of friends where that isn't the case. So the people I know who didn't have any background in Eastern Germany, I can count by one hand from maybe a circle of friends going up to 100, which I had. So it kind of struck me there really is an issue, and a lot of people, more than what I thought, were affected by this. Another key event was for me that I spent a lot of time in the Ukraine. I was working in the Ukraine, and I met a lot of Ukrainians and Russians who were living in eastern Ukraine. Now, when I grew up in Westphalia, my mother typically cooked Westphalian. She had Westphalian culture, and that was the norm for me. Whenever I went to my grandparents' my father's parents, my grandparents from my father's side, and who were living in a different town. They were living about 60 miles away, so I didn't see them quite regularly. What I noticed is that the culture was very different. They had a different dialect, a different accent. They spoke slightly differently. They ate different food. They had a different culture, different values. Everything was a little bit different, and I thought they were just very odd people. Now, when I was in the Ukraine, and I was dealing with Ukrainians or with Russians in the Ukraine, I thought somehow this all feels very familiar. Why does it feel so familiar? And then one day the penny dropped, and I realized, yeah, the way they behave, the way they interact, the way they eat, the way they talk, it's just the way my family did from East Germany, from de facto Eastern Europe. And then the penny dropped, and I started thinking a lot about this culture, what it all stood for, what it means. And I was thinking about all the other people I know, old people I know who were brought up in this culture. And I could see that there was this trace, that they had this very unique, I should say very unique culture, which I didn't really find in Westphalia, amongst Westphalian people, or in other parts of Germany where I had dealings with, like in Bavaria or in the Rhineland or anywhere else. So there was something special which was unique to this region of Germany, and which unfortunately is being lost because all these people have been driven out. I was looking further into it, and I couldn't believe how many people were actually driven from this part of Germany. The figure is just mind-blowing when I looked at what was really happening and what was taking place. And my sentiments at this time are that it's very important to tell the world, look, there was a Holocaust which was terrible, and there was no excuse for it. There was terrible deeds were done in Germany and through Germans, but not through all Germans. Many Germans had nothing to do with that, and they didn't know about this. And then after the war, almost the same, not maybe quite as sophisticated, but almost the same had happened to a group of Germans, which far outnumbered the group the Germans were targeting, and they were no fault of their own to do this. They were just civilians, they were mothers, they were children, they were old people, they were just people who were living in reasonably peacefully in this part of Germany. And because of the whim of some politicians, about 10 to 14 million people were bereaved of everything they had. Everything they had was taken away from them, and they were forced to go to West Germany. I'm just going to go to the first slide again, and you can see a couple of pictures of what this entailed. You see all the transports, and you see the little carts, and that was very often, the cart here on the bottom picture, that was very often all people could take. Whatever they could take on their body or, take by hand, that's what they were allowed to take. All the rest they would have lost, and they couldn't have it. And then these people had to go to West Germany, to a country which was bombed out and pretty much destroyed, and they had to make a new beginning in a destroyed country. And obviously they weren't received with open arms. They were just considered to be a burden. And you have to bear in mind, we are talking about a fifth of the German population. A fifth of the German population, close, maybe a sixth, a fifth, around about there, who were forced to be taken up by the rest of Germany. Absolutely horrendous what went on there. And that was after the war, when people were trying to reconcile, to look for peace, to build Europe back up again. And between 1945 and 1950 and 1951, this stuff was happening, was going on. It just beckons belief that it was possible and that the Allies would agree to that. It's important that we don't forget about this, and that we remember whatever was going on, and also some of the attitudes which are here today, and that there is not the slightest, like Kaczynski, there's not the slightest acknowledgement that whatever was done there was an injustice to the German people and to those German people who were there. There's obviously the argument, okay, the Nazis did something terrible, therefore there is the argument of retribution. Now, I had a look at where the Nazis were coming from, and there were some of them from Berlin, a lot of them were from South Germany, and the top guy was from Austria. Now, I know all of these areas suffered as well, but why did 30 million people have to pay? who didn't produce any Nazis. None of the top Nazis came from that part of. I'm talking about the top regime came from that part of Germany. I checked them all out, saw where they were coming from, and they were pretty much from all over Germany, predominantly the south and the west. And yet the East Germans, they had to suffer for it, and they had to pay the debt Poland and Russia believed they were owed by whatever happened. Okay, let's have a look. Raise awareness of the suffering to millions of people in the aftermath of the war. It's very important. People need to know what was going on. I think Gorbachev, he said, if you don't learn from your history, you're forced to repeat it. And there's something to it. We need to see what was going on there. We need to understand this. The next thing is the Polish government really should publicly apologize for stealing land and goods from millions of people. It wasn't the Polish people, just to make the point, but it was the government. It was government initiated, partly supported and protected by the Soviet powers who were there to oversee the whole process, and yet it cannot be right. It cannot be justified. Even if you put land under foreign administration, why do you rob or why do you steal from people their houses, their homes, the things they own, their animals, their cows, cattle, whatever they have? Why do you steal it from them if you have taken over the government for a particular set of people? Okay, and finally about this talk, I mean, I went to Meseritz, I went to Schwiebus, I had a look around. At the time of the war, I estimate there would have been somewhere in the region between 50,000 to 100,000 people living in both cities. So maybe the figure goes up to 200,000. At a guess, I would say that with the descendants of the people who were driven away from Schwiebus and from Meseritz, we're looking maybe at about at least the same number, between 100,000, maybe up to 500,000 people who might be interested to see what these two towns look like, Schwiebus and Meseritz. So the slides which come now, they are just pictures which I've taken from both towns, and hope you enjoy them. If not, that's okay too. So anyway, it's just something for you. I made the journey. I realized that many of the people who left East Germany, some of them might have gone to emigrated to America or to other countries. Some of them might have stayed somewhere in West Germany. But it's a chance for you to just see what it looked like. Okay, first of all, the journey. So I went to Frankfurt an der Oder, crossed into East Germany or Poland, and this, in case you do the same trip and you want to go to Schwiebus, which is here, Schwiebocin in Polish, and Meseritz, which is Meseritz, yeah, in Polish. This is what you need to do. Okay, you go in via Frankfurt an der Oder. You drive for, don't know, 20, 30, 40 kilometers, and then you see a signpost, and I've lost my mouse here. You see a signpost at this time to turn off, to go to Schwiebus, and I advise you, really do turn off. Your sat-nav is probably going to tell you to carry on driving and to leave the motorway at this point here. Now, if you don't turn off, this is a toll road, and all these exits have been closed down because they don't man the exits. So the next crossing is or the next opportunity to try and turn around. I've lost my mouse again. It's somewhere around here. So it's another 40, 50, 60 kilometers past this junction here. So you lose a lot of time if you use a motorway. So get off at the signpost here, and then you drive to Schwiebocin, and from there maybe to Meseritz. Now I missed my junction, and I had to go 60 kilometers extra. And you see this little road here. That's how I went into Meseritz, and the train station is actually on this road here, and you will see this in a minute. Okay, this is a journey I did. So I went in, so I should have maybe drawn this a little bit further. So I went back from the motorway here, drove into Meseritz, had a look at Meseritz, and a lot of photos about Meseritz. Then I went to Schwiebus, took a lot of photos in Schwiebus as well, and a few on the way. Then from Schwiebus I went to Liegnitz, and again there are a few photos which I did on the way from some sites which I thought might be quite interesting. Liegnitz, I went on the main motorway again, past Breslau, and then all the way to Krakow. Just to make the point, Krakow was never German. I think at one stage it was Austrian. The population there has always been Polish. When Poland became independent, there was a big discussion of whether Krakow or Warsaw should be the capital. And anyway, I thought it was just interesting. There are also a few photos of Krakow as well, and then the last photo is from Katowice airport, where I flew back to England, and yeah, that pretty much was it. Okay, let's have a look. This is Meseritz, the bus station in Meseritz. A couple of things as well. I do speak a little bit of Russian, and I always thought that Polish, I understand a few Polish words because they're very similar to Russian. So I thought, okay, if I ask somebody, I ask them in Russian and try to get a reply from them if I ask for the way or something. And people are very unfriendly towards Russian-speaking people. That's what I noticed. Yet if you speak English or German, they're very nice, or at least nicer to you. Okay, this is Meseritz, a bus station, and it's next door to the train station. And that is a train station. It looks abandoned and in a bad state of disrepair. I assume that this is the train station, or the view would have been very similar almost 100 years ago when my grandfather would have left Meseritz with his wife to go for his job in Germany, in West Germany, in Hagen. And yeah, anyway, that's what it looks like. That's from a distance. Behind there are the trucks, quite a few trucks as well. So by the looks of that, it probably at one stage was quite a big train station, an old house near the train station, and a water tower, just again near the train station. So I've just been taking some photos around there. Okay, and you can see a few trucks as well. I haven't seen any activity on the train line, so I don't know whether the train station is still in operation or not. Okay, and that's looking away from the train station. You can see a big access road and probably easy for buses to get there. And yeah, that's going back. I parked my car there, so that's a little bit further down, about a kilometer further down the road. And these are just impressions of Meseritz. That's the town center of Meseritz. Nothing spectacular. It's actually quite a boring town center. A few shops. There's a church, a couple of churches there, a signpost which I found very annoying, but we're going to look at this later. Okay. Yeah, the architecture is quite amazing. This is a chemist, Apteker. Interestingly, it's the same as in Russian. They say it as well, just the letters look different. And in German, Apotheker. And these are the architecture, absolutely amazing, interesting architecture. And I think a lot of it possibly comes from 100 years ago and before. Okay, the main junction of Meseritz. And a couple of churches. This is the site around the town hall. That I think is a town hall. Yeah. Just the street around the center of Meseritz. Yeah. And again, one thing which strikes me is the typical architecture. I've seen similar architecture in Berlin and sort of generally in the Prussian East. And again, I assume that this building is probably over 100 years old and has been stood there for a very long time. Just a few more houses around there, just a street. And here we've got the city plan, street map of Meseritz. And there's also a lot of explanation there. This was one thing I took from this signpost here. Just took a photo. One thing which really bugs me about this description here, it talks about, that it was a very old city, being founded in the 12th century. They think it goes back right to the 5th century, and that it was part of the Polish Empire. Then they make the point that it was on the frontier between Poland and Germany, and that the frontier moved about an awful lot. And then that after Napoleon, that's what they said after Napoleon, the city stayed under the German government up till about 1945, and then it returned to Poland again. Again, what bugs me about this description here, that there is no acknowledgement that the population of Meseritz was 90% plus German, and that these guys, the Germans, were basically evicted from Meseritz and were forced to leave the town. Now, I can tell this from my family, because even though my grandfather managed to get to Hagen, to West Germany before all this happened, 15 years before this happened, or more, all his brothers, I think he had about 6 brothers and a couple of sisters, all his brothers and sisters, they had to leave Meseritz, and they came to West Germany. Fortunately, he was there already, so he could look after them and house them until they could find their own feet, and make a start. But from that, I know exactly what was going on there, and not exactly, but I know from what they were saying, the stories they had, what life was like. And that town was a German town. The language which was spoken in this town for 500 years was German. I've seen the genealogy my grandfather has shown me from his family, and also from my grandmother's family, and all of them were German all the way through, up to about 1500. Now here they say that here they make a big point that, or they make it out like this was Poland all the way through, and that this was a Polish town. And the fact is, it's not true. They don't state it outright, but they implied that this was Polish territory all the way through. And yes, before 1200, it was Polish, but from about 1500 onwards, the population there was German, and was predominantly German. So for me, it's a bit of a bitter pill to swallow. Why? Because I know from my grandparents the history of this town as far as they are concerned. Now, the powers to be have rewritten the history. Nobody seems to stand up for these guys, and yet what is happening here is just like it's almost like a conspiracy, where from the German side, very little is done to try and clear this up from the political side, because they don't want to upset anybody, and they don't want to tarnish relations between the East and the West, but they want to build them up and do them. And from the Polish side, all we get is it's our own fault. It's a fault of the people who were there, that they were chucked out of the country. And my question is, how can they say this? I mean, these people didn't necessarily support the regime. They were civilians, they were women and children. They had lived there from what I know, what I can trace back for 500 years. And yet these people come along and they make these preposterous statements. Okay, just a few more pictures from Meseritz. This is a bit the landscape. This is just leaving Meseritz towards Schwiebus. When I was coming from the other direction, as I mentioned earlier on the slide, when I sort of missed my way, it was actually quite amazing, because there were really thick forests all the way through. The soil seemed to be quite good. Lots of stuff was growing there, and it was very countrified. There wasn't. The villages were very small. There were very few houses around. You didn't see many people around, and I was probably driving about maybe 60 kilometers to get back into Meseritz, so from east to west to get there, and just a very beautiful area. Okay, this is Schwiebus now, and we are now entering into the district of Schwiebus or Schwiebus, not the town itself at this point. It's just a little farmhouse. These were the roads. One thing which I noticed is the speed limits were quite low at times, 70 kilometers an hour, and the road was littered with speed cameras. I'd never seen so many. I can see the restriction. Just another house. This is before Schwiebus, so there were a couple of smaller villages before entering Schwiebus. An old castle, not sure whose it is or what it is. And some new builds. And right, that's a roundabout. Now, at that roundabout, I'm turning right in a minute. And after that, it's basically Schwiebus. Yeah. So I've turned right at the roundabout. It says here Schwiebus or Schwiebotzen. And this is now heading towards the center of Schwiebus. Yeah. So you can see photos are all taken from the car. Yeah. Heading to the center. The tower you can see in the middle is the white tower, is the town hall. So I parked my car and now I'm going on foot. And you can see the town hall here. Just some houses. One thing I noticed as well, a lot of satellite dishes around in Schwiebus and generally in Poland all over. It seems that every house had every second house had a satellite dish pointing to one of the satellites. Okay, this is the center of Schwiebus. So you can see a little bit how it's made up. And in the middle is the town hall, and there is sort of a center square which goes all the way around the town hall. And it seems all the the main activities seem to be happening there. But when I was there, was last year in August. It's very hot, about somewhere between 30 and 40 degrees. And it was in the middle of the week, so there wasn't much activity in town. You just see a few people milling around. And that's all really. It's a shopping street. And yeah, you can see them all the way around the town hall. Okay, just a church. I found two churches in the city center. I assume that in olden days, in the German days, that one, which was a normal practice, there was one Catholic church and one Protestant church. Judging from the style they were built, it seems to coincide with my idea. I don't know how true it is. Unfortunately, my grandparents, both died in the 1980s. So there's no chance to ask them what was what and how this works. Unfortunately, I couldn't trace down the house where they were living in either in Schwiebus or Meseritz. I've seen a picture of the house, not a photography, but a painted picture, and it was in the living room of my grandfather. And I was looking around in Meseritz. I'm not sure whether that was actually for my grandfather or for my grandmother, but I was looking around in Meseritz and in Schwiebus to see whether I could see a house which was similar. But I have to say I didn't. I sometimes thought I've got it, but I couldn't definitely say that, yes, that's a house where my grandfather or where my grandmother lived when she was young. Quite elevating, though. Going through Schwiebus for me was to sort of realize that, this is a place where my ancestors were, where they grew up, where they were spending their youth, where they were hanging out, walking through the parks. There are quite some nice parks around the center of Schwiebus. And I assume tradition in Germany used to be, I'm not sure whether it's Eastern German tradition as well, that if husband and wife marry and they're from different towns, from different churches, that they get married in the church of the woman. So my grandfather, and again I'm not sure, most likely would have been married in either of the two churches which were there. Which one, I don't know. They were Catholics, so it might have been one or the other. We've seen one. We're going to see the other one in a minute. That's still the back of the town hall on the square, which goes around it. And there's an interesting photo. It says over here, let me see whether I get my mouse going, that it was established in 1973, and yet this word is a typical, German font which was used in the 30s and 40s quite frequently. It says photograph, which I think is not a Polish word. I may be wrong, and please correct me if you are Polish and you are sort of watching this film clip. If it is, then this number doesn't make sense, and I would be surprised that the Polish authorities would allow somebody to open up a shop using a German terminology in this very sensitive area of all Germany. And if this is 1923, then it kind of makes sense, and it's probably just a remnant of the old times. But again, I don't know. I stand corrected for anything. I didn't go in. We didn't have much time to inquire, but I was quite surprised to see that there. Okay, just a few more pictures. Yeah, this is the other church. So I assume that my grandfather was married in either this church or the other one. For me, quite amazing, quite awe-inspiring to stand there and to have this link to my distant past, to my origins, to see where one half of my existence is coming from, and where the people lived who, where half my heritage really comes from. Okay, just another street around Schwiebus. And this is a park, and it's actually quite near the town center, so it's just turning away from the square, and in one area there's a small park. It's actually very nicely kept and very tranquil as well. So, as I said, fortunately I didn't have much time. I lost a lot of time when I missed the first exit, and that screwed up the whole planning for the day. But again, just a few pictures so you can appreciate what it is. A little bit the square. That's the plan for Schwiebus. For me, very interesting place. My resolution is to go back again and to explore a little bit more, maybe stay a few days in Schwiebus. I really loved it. I really liked the place. I didn't have much interaction with the people other than with some guys who were running a fast food restaurant. And that was all really. So I can't really comment on what the people are like over there. Generally, I found, being in Poland, that the people were fine as long as I didn't speak Russian. If I spoke Russian to them, for some strange reason, the welcome wasn't quite as hearty as speaking English or possibly even German to them. Okay, now I'm leaving the center, the town center. I'm going back to the car with air conditioning, which on that day was quite important. There was another park on the way back to the car. And I'm not quite sure whether this photo is taken from the car or not. Okay, so it's just leaving Schwiebus. Just another house. And here we've got Rio de Janeiro in Schwiebus. The figure you can see there at the back, and please follow the mouse. Look at the houses here, which are at the same distance. And then look at this figure, and it gives you an idea how big this monument is. So this is supposed to be Jesus, and when you close up on it, and again you can see some of the structures here, and it must be absolutely huge. Now this photo was taken from the car. I would have loved to, pull up and have a close-up look at what this monument looks like, but I was rushing. I needed to be in Krakow by the end of the day, so didn't really have time to look at that with the time I'd lost previously. Okay, it's just another photo. Anyway, that's just leaving Schwiebus in direction of Liegnitz, and that's what you can see. So that's going south from Schwiebus. So if you are interested, give it a go and go there. Just a pleasure park, some fun parks. And now we are in Krakow. So I've done all the motorway trip all the way, and by the way, it's a toll motorway. So if you take the motorway in the south, which sort of goes parallel to the Czech border, please remember to take some money with you, some zlotys. It's not very expensive, but you need to pay the motorway. So it's like if I remember right, about €1 for quite a long stretch, but you have to pay. Okay, that's Krakow. That's the central site. So arrived quite late. So by the time Krakow was, we were in the center of Krakow. It was about midnight, so it was quite late. Again, Krakow, an amazing city. I really loved it, and a lot of old architecture. I understand it's being run by the Austrians for some time. It reminded me a lot of Lvov in the Ukraine, or Lemberg, depending what pronunciation or what name you take. And Lvov seemed to be a miniature version of Krakow, so it was quite interesting. So very similar layout, Lvov and Krakow. And Lvov is a weird city. It's I know what Kiev is like and what the east of the Ukraine is like. And there's a certain feel to it as far as the architecture is concerned, the whole culture. And Lvov is sort of a hybrid. It's not really the west and it's not really the east. It's sort of something in the middle. It's really interesting and it's worthwhile to check it out and to see it yourself. Again, this is the central square of Krakow. I think on the right-hand side that's a town hall. Massive church there in Krakow. It's absolutely huge. That's the reason why I took the photo. The towers are really, really high. You can see a horse and cart and all the activity, which was still taking place at midnight. An old market hall, so it was closed when I was there, but apparently it's open during the day. Yeah. All the little restaurants on the central site in Krakow. And there was a little open-air market where you could still open at midnight, where you could buy some stuff. So very interesting. There's another picture of the market. A lot of people still milling about at that time. But bear in mind, it was summer. It was quite hot. It's probably the first time where you could actually enjoy being outside, since it was cooling down a little bit. But a lot of activity there. And yeah, you can see a little bit more. And that was Krakow. And the end of the journey was Katowice airport. That's it's about 40 minutes away from Krakow when you go by car, depending how you drive. And from there it was back to London. Yeah. So that was my little experience. I hope you did enjoy the little talk on the old Germany. And maybe some of the facts are new to you and they shake you up a little bit. Personally, I think it's important. You need to look at history and you need to, even if it's inconvenient and unpleasant, you need to understand what was going on. And if injustice takes place, you need to see it, name it, point out to it. I'm not looking, just to make the point, I'm not looking to incite heavy sentiments against Polish people. It wasn't done by the people who lived there. It was done by politicians who were making decisions and sometimes ignoring the fate of millions of people and putting them into a very horrible situation. My desire is from the politicians of this day and age, who are all looking into Europe and are all, doing everything to try and, join everything together, that they would just own up to it and say, whatever happened there was wrong. Nobody's looking to resettle the ancestors for those guys who were driven away out, for making life difficult for the people who live there now. But I think what is necessary is just an acknowledgement of things which have gone wrong and a genuine desire to reconcile to those who have suffered, or, the ancestors to those who have suffered. Another thing which kind of bugs me a little bit is that it is not possible for people who are Germans, or for any other foreigners, as far as I understand as well, to buy land in Poland. Maybe for the obvious reason they want to avoid that there's an onslaught of Germans going back, buying up all the land from their parents and grandparents, and controlling it. So that may be the reason behind it, but you cannot own 100% of a house or land in Poland as a German. Now, I feel that this is very wrong. My grandparents were living there. They owned land there. They had a farm, I understand. And I think it's just wrong. There should at least be the option for people who have got a heritage in their part of the world to be allowed to number one, purchase land, and also to live there, which I think under European law is not possible, but probably frowned upon by the Polish authorities. I think it's just wrong, and I think it needs rectifying, and that's my appeal. Maybe a politician is watching it, maybe somebody who can control these things is watching. I don't know, but it would be my desire to just rectify some of those injustices, starting off with an apology, and then later going on with allowing people who have got an interest in this part of the world to allow to express their interest and to contribute towards building up this country and towards investing into this country. That is my desire, and that's all. Okay, thanks for watching, and I hope maybe you feel free to leave some comments. I hope you did enjoy the photos. Not the best, I understand, but if you have never been to any part of that world, and yet you've got maybe grandparents who come from there, it might give you an idea of what it looks like, and what it was like for them. So I'm sure some of the buildings you will have seen were the same as 70, 80 years ago as what they are today. Okay, thanks for watching. Bye-bye. God bless.